John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born in May 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts, into a family that embodied both privilege and expectation. His father, Joseph P. Kennedy, had already built a reputation as a shrewd businessman and ambitious political figure, while his mother, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, was deeply religious and devoted to instilling discipline and moral values in her children. The Kennedy household was not only large, with 9 children, but also competitive, filled with the unspoken pressure that each son and daughter must achieve greatness and contribute to the legacy of the family. In this environment, John, often called Jack, grew up under the shadow of his elder brother Joseph Jr., who was seen as the natural heir to his father's political dreams. From his earliest years, Jack's life was marked by fragile health. He suffered from frequent illnesses, bouts of scarlet fever, and lingering back pain that often left him bedridden for long periods. Yet these struggles did not weaken his spirit. Rather, they forced him to develop resilience and determination. While his siblings competed on sports fields with vigor and strength, Jack often turned to books and study, building an intellectual arsenal that would later serve him in public life. His illnesses shaped his character in quiet but powerful ways, giving him a perspective on vulnerability and endurance that remained with him throughout his life. The family environment pushed Jack to test himself constantly. Mealtimes were arenas for sharp debates about politics, history, and current events, as Joseph Kennedy insisted his children be not only informed but articulate. Jack, though sometimes more reserved than his elder brother, displayed a wit and charm that made him stand out. He developed an early love for history, reading about great leaders, empires, and wars. His essays and reflections revealed a young man who sought to understand not just events, but the deeper forces that shaped them. His school years reflected the combination of privilege and pressure that defined his upbringing. Jack attended elite private schools, including Choate, where he struggled with the expectations placed upon him. He was intelligent but not always disciplined in his studies, at times preferring mischief or social life to rigorous academic work. Yet even then, his sharp mind and ability to connect with others earned him a circle of loyal friends. Teachers noted his charm and curiosity, even if they sometimes doubted his seriousness. The tension between effort and ease marked his education, but beneath the surface, Jack carried a drive to prove himself independent of his family's name. When he entered Harvard University in 1936, he stepped onto a larger stage that allowed him to refine his intellect and shape his worldview. At Harvard, Jack studied government and international relations, subjects that would become central to his career. He immersed himself in debates about democracy, power, and global affairs, reading widely from the classics of political thought as well as contemporary analyses of world events. His interest in journalism and writing grew during this time, as he contributed to student publications and sharpened his ability to communicate ideas with clarity and conviction. Harvard also gave Jack a broader view of the world. He traveled through Europe, observing firsthand the political tensions rising before the Second World War. In London, Paris, and Berlin, he encountered the fragility of peace and the ambitions of dictatorships. These experiences made a lasting impression on him, convincing him that the United States could not remain isolated from global challenges. He began to see politics not as abstract theory, but as a living struggle with profound consequences for humanity. His senior thesis, later published as a book titled Why England Slept, reflected this early awareness of the dangers of appeasement and the responsibilities of leadership. Jack's years at Harvard were also a time of personal development. He cultivated a style that combined informality with seriousness, becoming known for his ability to engage people across different circles. Though illness continued to trouble him, requiring hospitalizations and constant medical attention, he never allowed these obstacles to define him. Instead, they heightened his determination to make his life matter. He was not content to be seen only as the frail younger brother or the son of a wealthy father. He sought his own identity, one grounded in intellect, courage, and an expanding sense of duty. His family's expectations weighed heavily on him, yet they also propelled him forward. Joseph Kennedy's ambition for his sons was unrelenting. One of them, he insisted, must become President of the United States. For years, all eyes were on Joseph Jr., but Jack's combination of resilience, intellect, and charisma gradually positioned him as an alternative heir to the dream. His youth was thus not only a time of personal growth, but also of preparation, often unspoken, for a future in which he might be called to lead. By the time he graduated from Harvard in 1940, John F. Kennedy had already lived through experiences that shaped his outlook on life and politics. His fragile health had given him strength of will. His education had broadened his understanding of the world, and his travels had shown him the stakes of international conflict. Though still young and uncertain of his precise path, he carried within him the qualities of resilience, curiosity, and a restless drive for purpose. His early years, framed by privilege but sharpened by adversity, laid the foundation for the leader he would one day become. When the United States entered the Second World War, John F. Kennedy felt the weight of responsibility that had been instilled in him since childhood. Though his health remained fragile, with chronic back problems and recurring illnesses, he insisted on serving his country in uniform. After undergoing rigorous training, he was accepted into the Navy and eventually assigned to command a patrol torpedo boat in the Pacific Theater. This appointment marked the beginning of one of the most defining chapters of his life, a time when personal courage and resilience were tested in ways he could never have imagined. The Pacific War Zone was harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Kennedy's boat, PT-109, was small and vulnerable compared to the massive warships that dominated the ocean, but it played a crucial role in reconnaissance and surprise attacks. As a commanding officer, he quickly earned the respect of his crew. He was not a distant leader, but one who worked alongside his men, sharing their burdens and dangers. Long nights of patrols, constant threats of enemy aircraft, and the uncertainty of combat created an environment where fear was ever present. Yet Kennedy maintained a calm demeanor that inspired confidence. His ability to lead under pressure reflected not only his training, but also the resilience forged by years of battling illness. The pivotal moment came in August 1943. While operating near the Solomon Islands under the cover of darkness, PT-109 was suddenly struck by a Japanese destroyer. The collision was devastating, splitting the boat in half and engulfing it in flames. Many would have panicked or surrendered to despair, but Kennedy's instinct was to take charge. Despite suffering from severe injuries to his back, he gathered the surviving crew members, some badly wounded, and made the decision to swim toward a small distant island. The journey was perilous, with men clinging to debris and the constant threat of enemy patrols looming. Kennedy towed one severely injured crewman by clenching the man's life jacket strap in his teeth, swimming tirelessly through the dark waters. The ordeal lasted for days. On the island, food and fresh water were scarce, and the men faced exhaustion and uncertainty. Kennedy repeatedly swam long distances to scout for rescue opportunities and to seek help from nearby natives, pushing his already weakened body beyond its limits. His persistence eventually paid off when local islanders carried a message carved into a coconut shell to Allied forces, leading to the crew's rescue. This extraordinary episode transformed Kennedy's public image. Newspapers back home portrayed him as a hero, and while he remained modest about his actions, the story became a symbol of bravery, endurance, and responsibility under the harshest circumstances. The war left marks that went beyond physical scars. Kennedy's back injuries worsened, causing him pain for the rest of his life and requiring multiple surgeries in the years ahead. Yet, rather than discouraging him, the experience deepened his sense of urgency and purpose. Having confronted death so directly, he came to believe more firmly that life was fragile and fleeting, and that it had to be devoted to meaningful service. This conviction shaped his worldview, giving him a seriousness and resolve that contrasted with the carefree image of his privileged upbringing. The admiration he received after the PT-109 incident was not simply for his survival, but for the way he carried others with him. He demonstrated that leadership meant taking responsibility in the darkest of times, even when strength seemed impossible to summon. These qualities resonated with the American public and with his own family, further solidifying the idea that John, not just his late elder brother Joseph Jr., could fulfill the family's political destiny. The war, therefore, became not only a trial of endurance, but also the crucible that refined his identity as a future leader. As the conflict continued, Kennedy remained in service, though his injuries limited his assignments. He carried the weight of both personal sacrifice and the loss of comrades, experiencing firsthand the costs of global conflict. The war impressed upon him the interconnectedness of nations and the necessity of American engagement in the world. It reinforced his belief that leadership was not an abstract concept, but a lived responsibility, where choices meant the difference between life and death. By the time he returned home, John F. Kennedy was no longer the sickly younger son overshadowed by others. He had emerged from the crucible of war as a man whose courage, endurance, and sense of duty had been tested and proven. His name was now associated with heroism, and though he never boasted about his actions, those who knew the story understood that his path had been forever changed. The war left him with chronic pain and a fragile body, but also with a sharpened awareness that his future must be dedicated to public service. He had faced mortality in the most direct way, and in surviving, he carried with him an unshakable conviction that he must use his life for something greater than himself. After the war, John F. Kennedy returned to civilian life with the quiet certainty that his path could no longer remain that of a spectator. The experiences of service, hardship, and survival had left him with an acute sense of responsibility and a need to contribute directly to the future of his country. The Kennedy family, already deeply invested in public life, recognized that John possessed both the resilience and the charisma to step into the arena where their late son Joseph Jr. had once been destined to shine. It was decided that John would carry forward the political legacy, and Massachusetts, with its strong Irish-American communities, became the natural starting point. In 1946, Kennedy declared his candidacy for the United States House of Representatives. He was young, relatively inexperienced, and plagued by health problems, but he also had a rare gift for connecting with ordinary people. On the campaign trail, he presented himself as approachable and sincere, someone who could translate the complexities of global events into language that resonated with everyday citizens. His speeches avoided pretension, favoring clarity and warmth. At the same time, the Kennedy family machine worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring financial backing, organizational strength, and a strong network of support. The combination of his personal charm and his family's influence proved effective, and Kennedy won the election. As a congressman, he quickly distinguished himself. He was not the most outspoken member of the House, but his approach combined thoughtfulness with an ability to cut through technicalities. He immersed himself in foreign policy issues, drawing from his wartime experiences and his studies at Harvard. He had seen firsthand the costs of global conflict and believed strongly in America's role in international affairs. This seriousness set him apart from colleagues who often focused narrowly on local or partisan matters. His youth also made him a symbol of generational change at a time when much of Congress was dominated by older figures shaped by earlier decades. Despite his growing reputation, Kennedy faced challenges that constantly tested his endurance. His health remained fragile, with severe back pain forcing him into hospital stays and limiting his activity. Yet he rarely allowed these struggles to define his public image. He projected energy, optimism, and discipline, carefully hiding the extent of his suffering. The determination to persevere through physical adversity became part of his character, adding to the perception of a man both vulnerable and resilient. In 1952, after serving several terms in the House, Kennedy set his sights on the Senate. The campaign was arduous, pitting him against Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., a seasoned Republican incumbent with deep roots in Massachusetts politics. Kennedy campaigned tirelessly, traveling across the state, meeting voters face-to-face, and delivering speeches that emphasized renewal and fresh leadership. His youth, combined with his war record and an appealing vision for the future, captured the imagination of voters. Against expectations, Kennedy won, defeating Lodge and establishing himself as a rising figure in national politics. As a senator, Kennedy further refined his identity as a politician who combined intellect with accessibility. He focused on issues of national defense, foreign policy, and social reform, positioning himself as both pragmatic and idealistic. Though not always at the forefront of legislation, he cultivated a reputation for careful preparation, eloquence, and a willingness to challenge conventional thinking. His speeches attracted attention for their clarity and for the sense of vision they conveyed, appealing not just to immediate concerns, but to broader questions about America's role in the world. During this period, Kennedy's personal life also became part of his public image. In 1953, he married Jacqueline Bouvier, a young woman of intelligence, elegance, and cultural sophistication. Their union captured the imagination of the American public, who saw in them a couple that embodied both tradition and modernity. Jacqueline's style, grace, and fluency in languages made her a symbol of refinement, while Kennedy's youthful vigor and political ambition created a powerful contrast with the older generation of leaders. Together, they projected the image of a new era, one marked by vitality, charm, and hope. The marriage also broadened Kennedy's appeal beyond politics. Newspapers and magazines featured photographs of the couple, portraying them as glamorous yet grounded. This public fascination reinforced his political career, making him not just a senator, but a cultural figure whose life seemed to mirror the aspirations of post-war America. The Kennedys represented possibility, renewal, and a sense that the country was ready to move forward into a different kind of future. Yet behind the public image, Kennedy's challenges remained significant. His health required multiple surgeries, and at times his survival was in question. He faced long recoveries and moments of near despair. But these experiences only deepened his resolve, convincing him that his time was limited and that his contributions had to be made with urgency. He became more disciplined, more focused, and more determined to leave an enduring mark on public life. By the late 1950s, Kennedy's name was increasingly mentioned beyond Massachusetts. His combination of war heroism, political experience, and personal charisma made him a figure of growing national interest. He had managed to balance the burdens of illness with the demands of political life, projecting an image of strength while enduring private struggles. His career in the House and Senate had given him a foundation, but more importantly, it had taught him how to connect with people, how to frame ideas in ways that inspired, and how to embody the promise of a younger generation eager to reshape the nation's future. By the dawn of the 1960s, John F. Kennedy had transformed from a promising senator into one of the most compelling figures in American political life. His wartime heroism, legislative experience, and ability to frame issues with clarity and vision gave him a national platform. But it was his energy, charisma, and calculated image of youthfulness that set him apart. The post-war United States was a nation standing at the threshold of dramatic change, grappling with the Cold War abroad and questions of equality and modernization at home. Against this backdrop, Kennedy saw an opportunity to present himself as the embodiment of renewal, the face of a new generation ready to carry the nation forward. In 1960, Kennedy made the decision to seek the Democratic nomination for president. This was no small undertaking, for the party contained seasoned leaders and established power brokers who doubted that a relatively young senator could command national authority. There were also suspicions about his Catholic faith, as many Americans worried about whether a Catholic president might be influenced by the Vatican. Kennedy and his team confronted these concerns head-on, presenting him as a loyal American whose religious identity would never interfere with his duty to the Constitution. His speech to Protestant ministers in Houston, where he declared his absolute separation of church and state, helped to neutralize this fear and reframe the debate around his character and vision rather than his faith. Kennedy's campaign was marked by a remarkable grasp of the new political tools of the age. Television, which had begun reshaping American culture in the 1950s, became central to his strategy. He understood its power not only as a medium for information, but as a stage for personality, image, and presence. His campaign broadcasts emphasized optimism, family values, and a forward-looking message. He was presented not as a remote politician, but as someone who could sit in the living rooms of ordinary Americans and speak directly to them. His wife Jacqueline, with her poise and cultural refinement, became an asset to this image, helping to complete the picture of a couple who symbolized style, intelligence, and modernity. Perhaps the defining moment of the campaign came in the series of televised debates with Republican candidate Richard Nixon. For the first time in American history, the debates were broadcast nationwide, allowing millions to witness not only the arguments, but also the demeanor of the candidates. Nixon, experienced and knowledgeable, approached the debates with confidence, but Kennedy's calm, polished appearance and clear articulation of his positions won the admiration of viewers. While Nixon appeared tired and unwell under the studio lights, Kennedy exuded composure and vitality. The contrast was stark, and for many Americans, the debates underscored Kennedy's readiness to lead, solidifying his image as the candidate of the future. Kennedy's message of the new frontier became the centerpiece of his campaign. He called on Americans to embrace challenges at home and abroad, urging them to see themselves as part of a great endeavor that demanded sacrifice, imagination, and courage. He spoke not only of defending freedom against global threats, but also of advancing social justice, improving education, and expanding opportunities. His rhetoric drew from a tradition of idealism, but was delivered with a freshness that resonated with young voters, intellectuals, and those disenchanted with the cautious politics of the past decade. The New Frontier was less a concrete program than a call to action, and it gave his campaign an inspirational force that distinguished it from that of his rival. The election of 1960 was one of the closest in American history. Kennedy faced the formidable challenge of Nixon, who had served as vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower and was widely regarded as a strong and experienced candidate. The campaign was hard-fought, with both sides mobilizing vast resources and traveling tirelessly across the country. Kennedy's speeches drew enthusiastic crowds, particularly among younger voters and minority groups who saw in him a champion of progress. Nixon, by contrast, appealed to continuity and experience, arguing that he was better suited to guide the nation in uncertain times. When the votes were counted in November, Kennedy emerged victorious, though by a narrow margin. He secured the presidency with just over 100,000 votes separating him from Nixon in the popular count, a testament to the intensity of the contest. Yet his triumph was historic. At the age of 43, Kennedy became the youngest elected president in American history and the first Catholic to hold the office. His victory was not only personal but symbolic, representing the arrival of a new generation of leaders who would shape the nation's course in the turbulent years to come. For millions of Americans, Kennedy's election was a moment of profound anticipation. The images of the youthful president-elect and his elegant wife stepping into the White House captured the imagination of the nation. It seemed to mark the beginning of an era defined by vitality, possibility, and a break from the past. Kennedy had not simply won an election, he had inspired a sense of participation and belief in the future. His journey to the White House demonstrated not only his political skill, but also his ability to harness the changing currents of American life, translating them into a vision that resonated with the hopes of his fellow citizens. John F. Kennedy's presidency unfolded during one of the most volatile periods of the 20th century, a time defined by global confrontation and domestic transformation. From the very beginning of his administration in 1961, he inherited the weight of the Cold War, with the United States and the Soviet Union locked in an ideological and military rivalry that threatened to destabilize the world. Kennedy approached the office with vigor, projecting an image of youthful leadership that promised both strength and renewal. Yet beneath the optimism lay challenges of extraordinary scale, requiring decisions that could alter the course of history. One of the first major trials of his presidency came with the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. In April 1961, Cuban exiles, supported by the United States, attempted to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist regime. The operation collapsed quickly, leaving Kennedy publicly embarrassed and casting doubts on his leadership. Rather than retreat into caution, he used the episode as a lesson, becoming more skeptical of military advice and determined to refine his approach to foreign policy. This failure also intensified Cold War tensions, setting the stage for the most perilous confrontation of his time in office. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 tested Kennedy's leadership as no other event had. When American reconnaissance revealed that the Soviet Union was installing nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles from U.S. shores, the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war. Kennedy responded with a naval quarantine of the island and demanded the immediate withdrawal of the missiles. For 13 tense days, the globe held its breath as negotiations unfolded. Kennedy resisted calls for an immediate military strike, understanding that such action could trigger uncontrollable escalation. Instead, he pursued a strategy of firmness tempered by diplomacy, maintaining pressure while leaving room for compromise. Ultimately, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for U.S. assurances not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended without war, and Kennedy emerged with enhanced credibility, admired for his calm resolve and ability to navigate the most dangerous standoff of the Cold War. Beyond the Cuban crisis, Kennedy sought ways to manage the broader nuclear threat. His administration promoted arms control and sought to ease tensions through dialogue with Moscow. In 1963, he achieved a landmark with the signing of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, prohibiting nuclear tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. This agreement, supported by both the United States and the Soviet Union, was seen as a step toward reducing the existential danger of nuclear annihilation. Kennedy's speech at American University that same year, in which he called for Americans to see the humanity of their Soviet counterparts and to seek peace through mutual understanding, reflected his vision of leadership that transcended narrow self-interest in favor of global responsibility. At home, Kennedy's presidency carried the same mix of ambition and challenge. He advanced programs aimed at improving education, providing medical care for the elderly, and addressing poverty. While many of these initiatives faced resistance in Congress, they laid the groundwork for reforms that would later be enacted under his successors. Perhaps most significantly, he inspired a sense of national purpose through his commitment to science and exploration. In 1961, he boldly declared the goal of sending an American to the moon before the end of the decade. This vision galvanized the nation's space program, transforming it into a symbol of American innovation and determination. The Apollo missions that followed were rooted in the aspiration he set forth, turning his words into a defining challenge of the era. Beyond the Cuban crisis, Kennedy sought ways to manage the broader nuclear threat. His administration promoted arms control and sought to ease tensions through dialogue with Moscow. In 1963, he achieved a landmark with the signing of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, prohibiting nuclear tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. This agreement, supported by both the United States and the Soviet Union, was seen as a step toward reducing the existential danger of nuclear annihilation. Kennedy's speech at American University that same year, in which he called for Americans to see the humanity of their Soviet counterparts and to seek peace through mutual understanding, reflected his vision of leadership that transcended narrow self-interest in favor of global responsibility. At home, Kennedy's presidency carried the same mix of ambition and challenge. He advanced programs aimed at improving education, providing medical care for the elderly, and addressing poverty. While many of these initiatives faced resistance in Congress, they laid the groundwork for reforms that would later be enacted under his successors. Perhaps most significantly, he inspired a sense of national purpose through his commitment to science and exploration. In 1961, he boldly declared the goal of sending an American to the moon before the end of the decade.
This vision galvanized the nation's space program, transforming it into a symbol of American innovation and determination. The Apollo missions that followed were rooted in the aspiration he set forth, turning his words into a defining challenge of the era.
Kennedy also became increasingly engaged in the struggle for civil rights, a movement that was gaining momentum and urgency. Although initially cautious, by 1963 he began to take a more active stance, recognizing that the fight for racial equality could no longer be postponed. He proposed comprehensive civil rights legislation aimed at ending segregation in public places and ensuring equal access to education and voting. His televised address in June 1963, in which he framed civil rights as a moral issue as old as the scriptures and as clear as the Constitution, marked a turning point. Though his proposals faced strong opposition, they signaled a decisive shift in presidential engagement with the cause of justice and equality. Throughout his presidency, Kennedy's style set him apart. He cultivated an atmosphere of energy, sophistication, and idealism that became known as Camelot after his death, a reference to the sense of youthful promise and romantic vision his administration evoked. His press conferences, frequent and candid, displayed a sharp wit and mastery of detail, reinforcing his rapport with the American people. His personal charisma, combined with his wife Jacqueline's cultural elegance, gave the White House a sense of vibrancy and accessibility that captured the imagination of the public at home and abroad. Kennedy's presidency was not without setbacks or criticism. His legislative record was often limited by a divided Congress, and his cautious approach to domestic issues frustrated some reformers. His handling of Vietnam began with sending military advisors, a decision that would entangle the United States in deeper conflict after his death. Nevertheless, his capacity to inspire, his management of crises, and his ability to frame leadership as a call to shared sacrifice and service left a deep impression on the nation. By the time of his final months in office, Kennedy had come to embody the hopes of a generation. He had navigated the gravest international confrontation of the nuclear age, articulated a vision of America as both strong and compassionate, and set forth aspirations that would extend far beyond his presidency. His years in the White House, though tragically cut short, represented a blend of idealism and realism, a demonstration of how leadership could be both pragmatic and profoundly aspirational. On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy's life and presidency came to a sudden and violent end. While traveling through Dallas, Texas, in an open motorcade, he was struck by an assassin's bullets as cheering crowds lined the streets. The images of that day, of a young president collapsing into the arms of his wife, shocked the nation and reverberated across the world. His death was not only the loss of a leader, but the shattering of a collective vision that he had come to symbolize. For many, it felt as though a bright and promising chapter in American history had been cut short in an instant. The assassination plunged the United States into deep mourning. Millions of Americans watched as his coffin lay in state at the Capitol, and vast crowds lined the streets of Washington to pay their respects. The funeral, marked by the solemn procession and the haunting image of his young son saluting the coffin, became an indelible moment in national memory. Heads of state and dignitaries from around the world attended, reflecting Kennedy's status not only as President of the United States, but as a global figure whose influence reached far beyond America's borders. The grief was universal, and the sense of tragedy was heightened by the recognition of how much remained unfinished. Kennedy's presidency had lasted less than 3 years, yet its impact was disproportionate to its brevity. He had come to represent the possibility of renewal, the idea that government could inspire and uplift rather than merely manage. His words about service, sacrifice, and collective purpose resonated deeply, particularly among young people who saw in him a leader who understood their aspirations. The phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," continued to echo long after his death, becoming a call to civic duty that endured across generations. The mythology of Kennedy's presidency quickly took shape in the aftermath of his death. Journalists and historians began to describe his time in office as Camelot, evoking the legendary kingdom of King Arthur, where ideals of courage, honor, and vision shaped a golden age. The comparison captured the imagination of the public, presenting Kennedy's White House as a place of elegance, vitality, and hope. His youth, his eloquence, and the cultural grace of Jacqueline Kennedy reinforced the sense that his administration had embodied a rare moment of possibility. The suddenness of its end only deepened the impression that America had glimpsed something extraordinary, only to have it taken away too soon. Kennedy's legacy also endured through the policies and initiatives he set in motion. His commitment to the space program, encapsulated in the challenge to land a man on the moon, became one of the most enduring symbols of American ambition. Though he did not live to see it, the successful Apollo 11 mission in 1969 was widely seen as the fulfillment of his vision. His steps toward civil rights reform, though incomplete during his lifetime, paved the way for landmark legislation under his successor. His cautious but determined efforts to ease Cold War tensions remained a point of reference for later leaders seeking to balance strength with diplomacy. Beyond the specifics of policy, Kennedy's image as a leader remained powerful. For many, he symbolized the ability of politics to inspire rather than divide, to unite a nation around a sense of shared destiny. His charisma, combined with his intellect and idealism, gave Americans a glimpse of what leadership could achieve when tied to principle and vision. Even those who criticized the limited accomplishments of his administration acknowledged the enduring influence of his words and example.
The assassination itself became the subject of endless scrutiny, spawning investigations, conspiracy theories, and debates that continued for decades. The unresolved questions surrounding his death added to the aura of mystery and tragedy, ensuring that Kennedy would remain not only a historical figure, but also a cultural icon whose story was constantly revisited and reinterpreted. The fascination with his life and death kept his memory alive, bridging generations who had not lived through his presidency, but still felt its significance. In the years that followed, Kennedy's image continued to shape American identity. Streets, schools, airports, and public buildings bore his name, and his speeches were studied as expressions of leadership rooted in moral conviction. His call for service inspired movements both within and beyond the United States, from the Peace Corps he helped establish to broader commitments to civic engagement. His presidency, though brief, became a symbol of unrealized promise, of the belief that politics could be a vehicle for progress and for the pursuit of a better future. When Americans reflected on Kennedy's life, they remembered not only the man who had led them through perilous days of the Cold War, but also the youthful president who had dared them to dream bigger and to reach higher. His legacy lived on in the aspirations of those who sought to complete the work he had begun, in the institutions shaped by his vision, and in the enduring sense that leadership could combine courage, compassion, and imagination. The tragedy of Dallas froze Kennedy in time, preserving his image as eternally youthful and full of promise. Unlike leaders who age in office, his legacy remained untouched by decline or disillusionment, forever tied to the optimism of his early years in the White House. For many, this was both a source of sorrow and of inspiration. Sorrow for what was lost, inspiration for what remained possible. His story continued to remind Americans of the fragility of life, the urgency of action, and the enduring power of hope.